The Michigan Wolverines and the world-famous Ohio State Buckeyes are going to be taking each other on again in another highly anticipated matchup, November 25th, 2023, in which I think will not just be another top three matchup, I think it will be the game of the century matchup. You know, 1 versus 2, 2019 LSU versus Alabama, 2011 LSU versus Alabama, most famously in regards to Big Ten and Michigan Ohio State fans, 2006 Ohio State versus Michigan, which before 2022 was the last time that Ohio State and Michigan each met up facing each other off at 11-0. Of course, Ohio State won on that fateful day, 42-39. In reality, the score was not that close at the end. Michigan got a touchdown, 2-point conversion, and had to recover an onside kick to win that game. The most recent time Michigan and Ohio State faced off against each other at 11-0 was last year. Ohio State led 20-17 at halftime. We all know where that game went when Michigan came out at halftime. It was a 28-3 run. Michigan dominated in Columbus by a score of 45-23. Ohio State was favored in 9 points. They were favored by 9 points in that game, by the way. And despite the fact that I picked Michigan to cover, I picked Ohio State to win, despite being a Michigan fan. Yikes. But at least that proves that I am not biased. And what I am here to bring to you, whether you're a college football fan, a Michigan fan like myself, an Ohio State fan, what I am here to bring you is my respectable, evidence-based opinions, also bringing in some facts, build a narrative around this game, and just build and cook you all the most awesome meal that you will get to consume in the 2023 college football season, which I think will be the 2023 edition of The Game. Where do I start? I think both of these teams will meet up at 11-0 again. Ohio State entering the Michigan game, they start out on the road at Indiana. They return home to play Youngstown State in Western Kentucky before taking the road to face Notre Dame. They then return home to play Maryland, travel to Purdue, host Penn State. After Penn State, they play at Wisconsin, travel to Rutgers, before hosting Michigan State, and finally hosting Minnesota, which is the game before the game. For Michigan, they open up with 4 home games in a row: East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. They then have back-to-back road games at Nebraska and Minnesota before returning home to take on Indiana. They will then travel to East Lansing to face Michigan State, return home to play Purdue, play Penn State and Maryland on the road, back-to-back. I said pay there, and they are going to pay those two teams a visits and probably pay them with a beating on the ground as well before matching up against Ohio State in the game. Both of these teams, not only do I think they will beat every team on their schedule before facing off against each other, I think they will close to boat race every team they face on their schedule entering the game. Ohio State's toughest game, I think, will be on the road at Wisconsin before the Michigan game. And I think for Michigan before the Ohio State game, their toughest game will be on the road at Penn State. Their second toughest game, I'd say, for Ohio State will be either playing at Notre Dame or hosting Penn State. For Michigan, I'd say it would be playing at Michigan State or playing at Maryland. Maryland was a team who played Michigan close last season, and they're on the road at Maryland before the Ohio State game, and Maryland returns a lot on offense. And last year they matched up with Michigan very well. And I think for Ohio State, going back to a game where I think an opponent will match up with them very well, I think Wisconsin's style of offense and their style of defense, which Luke Fickell, Phil Longo, and Mike Tressel are introducing, I think could cause Ohio State's team some problems. But I think the Buckeyes and the Wolverines will overcome any adversity they face. They will crush their previous 11 games before meeting each other up 11-0 versus 11-0. Before I continue, I encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I produce more content on the game, on Michigan, on Ohio State, on Penn State, Michigan State, Nebraska, Minnesota, Maryland, any Big Ten team, any college football team. And I also encourage you to like this video, watch it all the way through, and share it with any college football fanatic friends that you have, and comment your thoughts on the game down below. Comment down your score prediction and who you think is going to win. Thank you. And let's get back to the video and get back to the content. So there's a lot at stake in this game. I think both are going to enter 11-0. I think whoever wins this game is going to probably be an automatic lock to win the conference. I think Wisconsin and Iowa can present tough challenges if those two teams win in Indy. I really like what Luke Fickell's doing at Wisconsin, modernizing them with the most talented roster in the Big Ten West. But it is year one, and that will hold them back or hurt them at some point. And Iowa is the opposite of modern. So I think whoever wins this game, as a comment once put it, and I forget what the video is, excuse me, basically what the comment said is whoever wins the Ohio State-Michigan game is going to collect the trophy in Indy, and they're playing the game as a formality. And I completely agree with that comment. And thankfully, divisions, I think, 99.9% sure will be eliminated, and we'll get a more fair, even, competitive round-robin schedule that pits the true number 1 and number 2 teams in the Big Ten against each other in the championship game. Which, hey, seeing Ohio State and Michigan potentially rematching 1 week later, boy, wouldn't that be extremely interesting to see. I think Michigan's the number 1 team in the country. I think Ohio State is the number 2 team in the country. Both are in the top half of their conference in returning production, and both are in the top half in the nation in returning production. Ohio State, I think, is top 50, top 45, maybe top 40 in returning production. Michigan is top 10, top 5 in returning production nationally. And those numbers are obviously higher when you look at only Power 5 teams, as you're weeding out a lot of Group of 5 teams that return tons of production every year. There's tons of emotion going into this game, too, and I want to talk about this for a minute or so before I get into some statistical predictions and expectations for this team, and also talking about some topics and what it will mean for Jim Harbaugh, Ryan Day, and their respective fan bases, and what they're fighting for in this game, too. We're going to get to all of that in this video. But first, I want to briefly unpack some of the emotional tension and the hatred between these two teams. We all know it exists. We all know it's high. But I think in 2023, it is going to be higher. Michigan has a win streak against Ohio State for the first time since, the 90s? They have a win streak against the Buckeyes for the first time since the 90s, guys. For the first time since the 90s, and that streak ended in 2001 in Jim Tressel's. Mike Tressel's uncle, I believe. Or not distant relative, but anyway, forget that. It's been a while since Michigan has had a streak against the Buckeyes, and they finally have one. They're 2-0 in the past 2 seasons. They won by 15 in 2021 and by 22 in 2022. They didn't just edge out Ohio State or beat them on a controversial play or beat them in a back-and-forth game that was completely equal, and it just came down to who got the second half kickoff and some of those little logistical things. No. Michigan dominated Ohio State in the past two matchups. It was competitive for the first half, for the first 3 quarters in each of those games, but Michigan always found themselves pulling away and stomping Ohio State in the 4th quarter. There's going to be a huge revenge arc on Ohio State's side. And there's still going to be revenge from Michigan because Jim Harbaugh, He still remembers those 5 losses to Ohio State. Some of Michigan's remaining team players remember that 2019 loss, or they were maybe there on a recruiting visit for that loss. Michigan's going to want to come out on their home field where they haven't lost a game at home since the 2020 season. They're going to want to continue that streak, and I think that they will leading into the Ohio State game. Ohio State's going to want to break that streak. They're going to want to show the nation that they can still control and rule the Big Ten. So a lot of goals at stake, a lot of emotions at stake. Ryan Day certainly has job pressure, not hot seat talk. He will not be fired for winning 11 games, and if he does, I think that would end Ohio State's long dynasty of being the most successful program since World War II. It'd be a big mistake if they fired him for going 11-1 most years, and that only loss being to Michigan. There's a lot at stake, though, for Ryan Day and his reputation, and even for Jim Harbaugh. This seems like a national title or bust season, and with the way Michigan has been recruiting, I don't know if Michigan can keep up their constant college football playoff appearances and Big Ten championship wins. But that's just my opinion. There's a lot of emotion going behind this game. Now I want to talk about the expectations, at least some of my personal expectations. I have Michigan ranked number 1, Ohio State number 2. I have Michigan going 15-0 and winning the national title. I have Ohio State going 12-2. In fact, I do think they will lose to Michigan, not once, but twice, which even for myself is somewhat hard to believe, but I think that Michigan, from a returning production angle and a matchup angle, and even a coaching staff angle, just matches up with the Buckeyes that good. But I don't think Michigan is going to be beating Ohio State by 15 points or even 22 points. I think this year's game in Ann Arbor will be more competitive. That being said, Ohio State, I think it'll still sting losing to Michigan, but I do also have them reaching the college football playoff despite that again, and this time winning their semifinal game. But we're just focusing on these two teams, and mainly their regular season matchup, and mainly how successful and how elite these two teams will be. I'm not focusing on who I think they will play in the semifinals. I'm not going to delve in too much on the specifics about the regular season that they have, or who I think out of all their players who will be at the Heisman ceremony, who won't be, who could be at the Doak Walker ceremony, though I think, speaking of that, Blake Corum and Mayan Williams will be there. But both of these teams, I have something called the potential power index, and basically what I do is through statistics and meshing that with my own opinion, which, yes, allows for potentially some bias to creep in, but also allows me to make some bold predictions and have some excitement and have some variability in my predictions too. I have an equation that takes those numbers, my opinions, facts, returning production, and by facts I mean like for running backs rushing touchdowns or yards per carry, for quarterbacks passer rating or passing touchdowns. I blend all that into an equation. It spits out a number. The team with the best number is ranked number 1, and that's Michigan. Michigan's number 1 in my potential power rankings. Ohio State's number 2. They're ranked very closely together, and when I factor in matchups and all of that, Michigan and Ohio State, when they play each other, it will be a one-possession game on average, is how the game will be decided. I think that Michigan will have a top 3 offense and top 2 defense by efficiency. I think Ohio State will have the best offense and a top 6 defense by efficiency. When it comes to scoring offense and defense, both of these teams should be top 10, I think, in both of those categories. I think both will have top 5 offenses in scoring. For defense, the only reason I can't say that is because I think Jim Knowles' scheme in year 2, while improved, there's still a lot of questions around it. I don't want to say Ohio State's going to have a top 5 scoring defense or even a top 5 defense, but I think top 15, top 10 will certainly be the reality. Michigan themselves at defensive line, it's been talked about in spring practice that their defensive line looks very elite, possibly the best defensive line of the Jim Harbaugh era. But you got to see it to believe it. They do have questions there, losing Mike Morris and Mozzie Smith. Despite losing a ton of production on offense for the Buckeyes, most notably C.J. Stroud, they return all their wide receivers. They return their running backs, their 2 starting guards. They return tight end Cade Stover. For Michigan, it's a similar story, except they return their quarterback, and they lose their top wide receiver, Ronnie Bell. They return their 2 starting guards, their running backs. They return tight end Colston Loveland, but unfortunately lose Luke Schoonmaker. They return J.J. McCarthy. Both of these offenses and defenses are well-developed, well-coached, well thought out. They make adjustments. They attack. They're physical. They are tough. And they're fast. Michigan, for the first time in a while, is fast. Just watch the Ohio State game from last year. Big plays were the reason Michigan didn't get behind by too much to come back in the first half. In Ohio State, we already know they're fast. Just look at their wide receiver development. Look at Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams when healthy. And to speak about the adjustment part, both of these teams have great defensive and offensive minds. Jim Knowles is making adaptations to make his defense more Big Ten, more national title palatable in 2023. Jesse Minter runs a modern 4-2-5 defense. Jim Knowles' defense is also technically a 4-2-5, and it's very modern and impressive. Both make adjustments. Both are good, reputable defensive coordinators who know what they're doing on the developmental side and on the recruiting side. Sharon Moore collaborating with Jim Harbaugh for offensive plays and for commanding the offense. Brian Hartline and Ryan Day collaborating. I mean, you have great staffs, great players. Both are top 50. I might have already mentioned this, but both are top 50 nationally in returning production. Michigan's much higher. They're number 5 in returning production overall, number 3 in only Power 5 teams. Ohio State, I think, is top 45, maybe top 40. But Ohio State is the 3rd most talented team in the country because they recruit much better than Michigan. So that kind of levels the playing field there. Ohio State recruits better. They aren't returning as much. And that levels out with Michigan returning a lot, but they have less star talent. They have less potential unicorns on the roster. I think both teams will win on average. This is including their bowl games. It includes Ohio State and Michigan's 2 matchups. I think both will beat their opponents on average by 4 touchdowns. They will wreck opponents. They will mentally break them. Both teams will, any defense that isn't better than their offensive line, they will maul by running up the middle, by running outside, by play action pass, by just straight up passing out of the shotgun. These teams are built to win championships on the Big Ten and on the national stage. You very easily could switch both of these records, and I could believe you. The way Ohio State is built this year with returning both of their guards and their running backs, and if Jim Knowles' defense can reach a top 5 level, which they certainly have the potential to do, you could give them the 15-0 record and Michigan the 12-2 record, and I think Ohio State could beat Michigan twice. I mean, both of these teams are built to be that good and have the potential to be that elite. Both of these teams are. Now, will they do it? We'll have to see the games play themselves. The beauty about the preseason is you can use a lot of theoreticals. You have facts to support your evidence, but you can also use a lot of speculation because, of course, neither team has played a game yet. There are going to be a lot of changes with the amount of time between the end of the previous season and the beginning of a new one. As you go from January, you really go from January to late August, early September without seeing different teams play each other. You see them playing themselves in practice. Maybe coaching staffs might visit each other, might collaborate. I don't even know if that's allowed, but I think it is. But you don't see anything more than practice scrimmages. So there's a lot of speculation going into this, but there's also a lot of facts in regards to the returning production, in regards to the fact that both of these teams should have elite offensive lines, elite running back rooms. they should have elite linebacker cores, elite secondaries. Michigan, with all they return and how they've recruited there, and them having Steve Clinkscale, and Ohio State bringing in Jihad Carter and Davison Igbinosun to pair with Lathan Ransom and Denzel Burke. And I think that the latter two, their development will be much improved by bringing in the veterans and great playmakers in Carter and Igbinosun, who started at Syracuse and Ole Miss, respectively. Igbinosun was a freshman All-American. Will Johnson, I think, was also a freshman All-American, or very close to it, at cornerback at Michigan. These are just, again, some of the expectations. Again, I think both of these teams will be top 10 in scoring offense and defense. Both, I think, will be top 5 in scoring offense. They're top 2 teams. They're going to be some of the most efficient teams in the country. Well-coached, well-developed. They have experience, veterans, and they have a lot of passion in their programs. The impact of this game and things that lead up to the matchup. Michigan will have the nation's best running back room, offensive line, linebacker, and defensive back groups in college football. Now, that's a lot of rooms, but a lot of that's the fact that they're so high in returning production. They have a great coaching staff, and their talent compared to Florida State and Kansas from a high school recruiting perspective, the only 2 schools that are ahead of Michigan in returning production, is vastly superior to those 2 schools. Granted, Florida State has done much better in the portal than Michigan has, but they kind of have to if they want to compete against Clemson and even compete for a playoff spot, given the current status of their roster. Ohio State, on the other hand, will have the nation's best wide receiver and defensive line group. That's a really bold prediction in regards to the defensive line. But look, for Ohio State's defensive line, let's start at tackle. Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, Mike Hall, and Hiro Kanu, who's going to be a redshirt freshman. That's a very deep defensive tackle room. Michael Hall, when healthy, was a beast. Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton are reliable. The main part of this defensive line that gives me the confidence that this prediction could have some weight to it is JT Tuimoloau. And the fact that Jack Sawyer is going to be developed into an actual defensive end, and he's not going to be used as this Swiss Army knife on defense where he can rush the passer, but he can also drop back into coverage. That's not what Jack Sawyer was built for out of high school. And I think that trying to fit him into the Jack position was trying to fit him in somewhere where he didn't belong. So Jim Knowles adapting that scheme and JT Tuimoloau just existing is a huge factor as to why I think they'll have one of the best and actually the nation's best defensive line. And they will have the nation's best offensive staff. Brian Hartline, Tony Alford, Justin Fry, and Ryan Day, of course, the play caller and the man who has commanded the #1 offense in efficiency for 2 years in a row. For Michigan, of course, nation's best running back room, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. Offensive line and linebacker and defensive back groups are more bold predictions. They return a ton at defensive back. They add Ernst Hausmann to linebacker along with Junior Colson and Michael Barrett. I still think by comparison, Ohio State would have the better linebacker compared to Michigan individually and Tommy Eichenberg, but Michigan's just so much deeper at that position, and I think Hausmann and Barrett will end up being better than Steel Chambers, for example. But a lot of these teams are very close at certain positions, and for Ohio State and Michigan, that is true. Their offensive line play, I think, will be close. Same with their linebacker play. Their defensive back play, I think Michigan currently will lead by a mile, but Ohio State's will still be good, and there could be potential for Ohio State to play close to them there. That's just kind of me saying in those first 2 bullet points for each team how good I think each will be. They will be the top 2 teams in the country. Michigan has dominated the series in the past 2 years, and they will be favored in this matchup. They'll be favored. They're currently favored, I think, by 1 point, which means Ohio State would be favored on a neutral site. So a lot of the money, a lot of the predictions and odds makers are still favoring the Buckeyes. And I think Michigan won't dominate this year, like the same that they have these past 2 years. But when it comes to the series, I think they will dominate. I think that will be shown by beating them in the regular season and in what will be an epic rematch in the college football playoff, which I think with the 12-team playoff, by the way, I think you'll see that with Ohio State and Michigan rematching more than once with the 12-team playoff, by the way. Ohio State, however, will have a revenge mindset, and they will be underdogs on the road. When Ohio State is an underdog, they are dangerous. Just ask Georgia. Just ask Georgia. Beat TCU 65-7, and Ohio State made them look helpless for 3 quarters. Look at Michigan in 2018. Ohio State underdog. They destroy Michigan and Columbus. Clemson in 2020. Underdog. Ohio State smashes them through the air. Now, then there'll be the one comment that says, what about Alabama in 2020? No one was beating that team. In fact, no team in college football history outside of probably 2001 Miami would be favored over that team, in my opinion. But Ohio State will have a revenge arc. They'll be underdogs on the road, and Ohio State, again, as an underdog, is a very dangerous team. You do not want to face Ohio. It's like facing Alabama as an underdog. You just don't want to do it. But Michigan, on the other end, has led the series and dominated the Buckeyes over the past 2 years. And I think there could be an argument after 2022 that they might even have a mental edge over Ohio State in this matchup, in the same way that Ohio State did over Michigan in the 2010s. Finally, Jim Harbaugh will be fighting for Big Ten dominance, possibly winning the conference for the 3rd year in a row. That'd be Big Ten dominance and a national championship. Ryan Day will be fighting for the same things, but more importantly than a national title, I'd say the Big Ten's important, but if he wins the Big Ten and beats Michigan but doesn't win a national title, the fan base they'll still be bothered by it, but beating Michigan, I'd say, is the biggest. That's the biggest priority right now outside of winning the conference. In order to win the conference, you most likely have to beat Michigan, which is why I still put that at number 1. But Ryan Day will be fighting to win back the Big Ten and the confidence of his fan base. If he can go into Ann Arbor and beat Jim Harbaugh and beat Michigan, that'll restore confidence from the fan base because he can go on the road against Michigan, beat him, and look, if Ohio State goes on the road and beats this Michigan team with how they're built, if they beat Michigan, I will fully predict them to go to the national title game and win, potentially in dominating fashion over whoever they face, unless it's a rematch against Michigan, which I think that Ohio State and Michigan, I don't think anyone is beating each other in a dominant, handily fashion this season. I think it will be a close game, close series of games, but that's just my own opinion. And the chance of that happening, I admit, is not high, but it is a prediction of mine. So the impact of this game is going to be huge. The ramifications will be huge. The intensity, the anger, the tension, the excitement. I cannot wait to sit down and watch this game and cover it. And I hope my prediction about them rematching in the national title game is right. And I hope that it happens more than just this year, because that's how good this game is. This is the Duke, North Carolina of college football, just to mention hoops since it's March Madness, except it's 10 times better. But again, that's just my opinion. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I always appreciate it. I encourage you to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening via Spotify, make sure to hit the notification bell. Always feel free to comment down below or even shoot me an email if you want to ask a personal question or just talk college football. Always down to do so. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.